Hello, welcome to the Peaceful Wood Turner. This is a piece of spalted maple. I made this bowl out of it recently, and I looked at it and I thought maybe I should try making a yarn bowl. Part of the reason for that is that the person who gave this to me is the father of a friend of mine, and that friend happens to do a lot of crochet work and stuff like that, and I thought it'd be kind of neat to make a yarn bowl for her out of the wood that her father gave me. So I've spent some time cutting some pieces off so that this is going to actually fit properly on the lathe. It's pretty much the maximum it could be on here, and it's actually relatively well balanced. I was a little surprised. I thought it was going to have a lot more vibration than it does. Even so, I'm going to start off going kind of slow, and I'm going to just kind of round some of this off, take off some of this bark. I've gotten off all the loose bits, but I know that these bigger bits are still going to come flying off as I work on this. And once I get it shaped down to round, I can start figuring everything else out. I did attempt in the past to make a yarn bowl, and it was just a rough attempt. Mostly I wanted to see how I would do with cutting out the little curly cue that you need, and I did really badly on that previously, so we'll see if I can do a better job this time. I should say this is on a faceplate. I just have the live center here just to give it a little bit of stability so that it doesn't rock or get loose or anything like that. But it's on a faceplate to start with, and I'll end up switching things around. So I changed the angle a little bit here. I wanted to show you something. You can see how I'm trying to come around here, and you can see there's these big areas that I'm just, I'm going to have to work down to. So I changed the angle, let you see the tool a little bit more, let you see what's coming off it a little bit more. I'm really happy that I'm actually getting some pretty good curly cues even out of the bark and stuff. So I'm glad about that. One of the things that I do, and if you're a turner, I'd love to know if you do this too. Right here you can see that there's plenty of space. As this is spinning, I get kind of a ghost image up here, and I found that if I watch that, I can kind of see if I'm getting close to the depth I need to get to. Same thing over here. As it spins, hopefully with this camera angle, you'll see that you can kind of see through at times, and so I get this kind of ghost image that I look at and I watch to know, because when that ghost image goes away, that means I've gotten it pretty close to round. I had to change the angle there, otherwise you would have been looking at my back. Alright, it's really close to the right shape for what I want to do. My thought is to give myself a little bit of a mortise in here, and I'll be able to put it on a chuck. That does a couple things. Once of course, it gives me a really secure fit, but the other thing that it's going to do is it's going to allow me to have a lot of weight in the base, and I can try to get as wide and flat of the base as I can. Everything I've found out about yarn bowls and stuff is that you want to have a nice heavy base so that it doesn't tip as you're pulling the yarn or anything like that. So it gives you plenty of resistance. So I think that's going to give me the best way of doing that. All I'm going to do is smooth this out a little bit more, get it a little flatter. I've got kind of some hills and valleys here. And once I get it nice and flat, then I'm going to mark for my chuck, and I'm going to go for not the biggest mortise, because I want to leave a lot of meat there, and I want to have a lot of strength as well as a lot of weight. So I'm not going to go for a very big mortise, and I'll get that lined out with my compass once I get this straight a little bit more. I'm going to speed up a little bit, and I'm going to switch to my bowl gouge. So the chuck does anything from a 2-inch hole up to a 3 3/8 hole. So I'm going to do a 10 inch, just a little bit larger than 2 inches. I've got my compass set, and I'm just going to give myself a basic line. I know if I go a little bit larger than that, I'll be fine. That should work. Now I just need to make the right depth. Switched around, so you're looking at the other side now. I do still have a very substantial flat spot right here, so there's going to be a lot of this material still going to have to come off. I'm able to go a lot faster now because it's much better balanced, so I'm going to be going about 1400 RPM. I'm also really glad that my regular dust collection hood is able to be back in here. I call it a hood. It's a humper pipe. What I had before was my dust collection was going, and I just had the vent cover over it so that it wouldn't have little things go in there that shouldn't go in there. But other than that, it was still doing its thing and sucking stuff down. So I'm going to continue to shape this. I'm going to use the spindle gouge and the bowl gouge, just back and forth, kind of depending. And let's see what we get. Rough shape is achieved. Everything is even. I'm hoping to save as much of this figure and stuff as I can, because that's really, really pretty. Of course, all these spots where there's all this figure, I'm also going across the grain in a kind of rough way, so it's going to take a bit of work to get that smooth as I want it to be. But for now, what I'm going to do is work on just hollowing this out a little bit. First thing I'm going to do is actually drill it out so that I have my depth set and I have the beginning done. I'm set up with my chuck, my Forstner bits. I'm just going to incrementally come up in height. I have my calipers set to the depth that I'm going to be able to go. And for the first couple of bits, that's actually just up to the collar here. So that'll work out fine. As I go a little bit larger, there's a little bit more space taken up in the head of the bit, so I'm going to have to adjust. But at least these ones are self-marked. So I'm going a lot slower because Forstner bits don't want to go any higher than about 700 RPM. So I'm going to go about 680 RPM. All drilled out. You can see that little lip at the bottom. That's from the deepest that I went, and I intentionally left that like that and left everything else a little shallower just so that I could have kind of an indication. Now I'm going to try to leave that little edge right there until I've got everything else to where I want it. Otherwise I'm going to end up working right through the bottom there and just go a little too deep, and then I'll have a nice little funnel. I hate when I do that. That's actually what I did on my first yarn bowl. I ended up not only screwing up other things about the shape and everything else, including the wood was still a little wet, so it's all kind of funky shaped, but I went too deep. So for experiments at that point, I just went ahead and put a hunk of plywood in there just to fill it in, because I wasn't liking how the rest of it turned out anyway, so kept using it as a learning experience. Hopefully we won't have any plywood in the bottom of this nice piece. So I'm going a lot faster now. I'm going to be going about 1800 RPM, and I'm still going to be working with my bowl gouge. I'll stop partway through and put a fresh edge on it too. So that is all of my shaping. Everything feels real good. There's some tool marks in here, but not a whole lot. Seems like it's a good depth. Seems like it's a good shape. There's enough from here to get a small ball of yarn in, and then once it's in there, it can kind of do its thing and it won't pop out over here. if you're not using the slot, and if you are using the slot, then of course it'll be doing fine that way too. But I've read a couple things that people are like, it just needs to have a heavy rim and it'll be fine. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to switch around now and figure out where I'm going to put my little curly Q for the yarn to go through, and I'm going to put that in now, and then I'm going to do all my sanding and everything. I had an idea because, well, of course I did. I have more ideas than I have sense most of the time. So, a piece of wire, I bent it around so that it has the curly Q shape that I want, which is way better than trying to do freehand like I did on the last one. Not so much. So, I have that on there. What I'm going to do now is just trace it. I've selected this part for a couple of reasons. One is it's coming off a lot smoother than some of the other sections just because of how the grain is and how the spalting has weakened some of the structure. So I figured, let me go in that smoother area, just less chance of the yarn catching on anything on the outside. Obviously there's still a heck of a lot of sanding to do on the inside, but figure that's a good spot. It also doesn't detract from any of the really pretty figure and stuff. So I set it up so I can kind of hook it on the inside, keep everything nice and straight. And I'm going to trace it. And that should give me something of a dimension, a little bit of a width to it. If you hear the noise in the background, I apologize. I'm not the only one with projects today. There we go. That looks pretty good. Should not have moved that before getting the end, but there. So that's my curly Q. Ideally, I would cut that with a coping saw, but I'm not doing ideally at the moment. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. Let's see if I can get a better light on that so you can see. There we go. Now you can see some of those lines. So I'm going to start working on cutting that out. I'm going to start with using my utility knife and just scoring this in. I tried out the utility knife on a couple other pieces of the scrap that I cut off of this, and it seems to be pretty controllable for me. So I'm going to start there, just lining it in. This is my smallest chisel, unfortunately. It is nice and sharp. I'm going to start carving out using my cuts on the edges as stop cuts. So I got a 60 grit. One thing you can't see, take care of that. One thing you can't see is that I've undercut this on the inside so that the yarn will be able to easily flow into it without having a sharp edge to go by. I skipped a lot of the sanding for you, but I've got that sanded out now. It's pretty smooth. There's a little bit of stuff right at the edges, just because those are the edges, and I think those are going to come off fine with the sanding as I do the rest of it. So now I'm going to start working on the inside first. That's going to take a lot of work. I'm not even going to show you that because it's just going to take forever. I'll just show you when I get to the outside. So I sanded the inside of it and put a finish on it. I put a dark walnut Danish oil on it, just to make it a little bit darker on the inside than on the outside, give it an illusion of a little bit more depth there. And as you can see, some of my finish I brought over the top just so that I can make sure I got the rim nicely. I have this now switched around in a type of a jam chuck here, and the reason for that is just so that I can really get it smooth. One thing I found with this piece is, even though I got a relatively nice finish on it, you can see there's these parts that just, you know, they didn't take it as well because they didn't get sanded as smooth. And if you go one way, they're smooth. And you go the other way, they're not. So, figured I had it relatively smooth the one way. Let me go the other way and get it down a bit more. So I'm going to start off a little bit aggressive, 100 grit, and I'm going about 500 RPM. Skipped a little there. I switched it around to be able to sand back the other way. Got things pretty close to smooth now, to the way I want them to be. I've gone up to a 320 grit going the other direction, so I'm going to finish off a little bit more with a 320 grit this way, and then I'm going to put a little bit of mineral oil on and do a wet sand with a 400 grit. That's great. It's really smooth. I really like how it's feeling so far. I'm going to put a coat of sanding sealer on it, let that set, and then I'm going to start putting my final finish on. Cleaned up a little bit. I've got my sanding sealer. Now, as I understand, a sanding sealer is basically just a really, really thin shellac. But I'm not going to make my own sanding sealer at this point. I'm just going to use the stuff that is what it's supposed to be. If I find out later there's a better way, I'll do that. So, if you make your own sanding sealer, Are you ready to make any of your own other finishes? Let me know what you think. Let me know your advice. I'm also going to be using some shine juice on this, which is something that I've only used once before, so I really would appreciate advice on that. That looks really good. Alright, I'm going to use shine juice. I know what you're supposed to do is actually use a dispenser, kind of like you would use for condiments in various takeout and barbecue type places. I don't have one of those dispensers at the moment. I need to make a trip to the dollar store and pick one up. But in the meantime, I'm going to do my flood coat just using a 4x4 bandage. So that was toilet paper I was using there, toilet tissue, just to work it in. It's feeling really good. So it's time for some finer coats. That took that shine really nicely. That method of just dripping it on really seemed to work well. I need to clean out right in here a little bit, and then I think it will be good. So I know I did a bunch of things wrong, and I welcome your feedback. Let me know my mistakes. Let me know what you liked. And I'll finish this up and show you the final product. There we go, a little yarn bowl. It's got a heavy rim. It's got a nice heavy base, relatively wide. The wood came out really, really pretty, and I think I did better on my curly Q than I did the last time. So I'm happy about that. I really like this. Please let me know what you think. And thank you for joining me on the Peaceful Woodturner.